Mr. Vimal Udaya for your presentation, and you presented your paper within the time limit.
My favorite title is always loved the one table and two chairs feature of Chinese Kun opera, which is reserved and deep, and gives more blank parts to the actors and the audience. These blanks have great freedom and challenges. They challenge the artist's ability to perform and simulate as well as the audience understanding and imagination. With one table and two chairs as registered stage elements, our country opera theatre has introduced the stage arts of different countries to perform the Ziem Art Festival. We have invited intangible culture heritage performance programs that, such as the No Place of Japan and Indonesia's folk dance, to interact with modern dramas and modern dance from Germany, Singapore, and other places. Each two interacted during the stage performance. Their theme was chosen by the artist himself, but there is always only one table and two chairs on the stage. All other black parts rely on cooperation of the artist's body, ceiling, clothing, and instrumental music. And the bamboo flute and Japanese shakuhachi. The dialogue between the masks of Japanese no players and clowns in Kun opera. We can also see their differences and collisions, many discoveries and new growths. The whole stage with finite one table and two chairs has become an idea about artists' exchange. Just 3 years ago, 2016 marked the 400th days anniversary of the famous Kun opera scriptwriter. His name is Tang Xianzu, and the British writer Shakespeare. They had a chance to die in the same year. The Kun opera went to Shakespeare's hometown and cooperated with local drama troupe in Tang Xianzu Shakespeare show to perform and communicate the famous four-act play of Kun opera. One drama is from our Kun and two dramas from Shakespeare. Shakespeare is A Midsummer Night's Dream and 12 Nights. Through the careful retain their characteristics, so that we can experience the fusion and self-consistence of Chinese confessions and cloister cultures. At Cathedral, it's St. Paul's Cathedral in London. It's a very old cathedral, but it was too old to have electricity. Chinese director's star and the actor could also small problems. The candle light was unstable, and in order to pick up a candle wick in the hot oil, the actor figures were burned back. However, when he went on the coffin, when he finished, the pain of being scared that contains precious happiness from ancient Estes. Tang Xianzu, Shakespeare, and all mankind when creating literature and art. From these meaningful artists' activities related to Kun opera, we can see a certain humanities of exchanges among region, nations, cultures, and literatures, as well as great possibles to be sought and created. We should particularly to note that the more restricted conditions in literature, modeling in Spanish, Italian, and Arabic. Young writers and the novels there was related to eating and dreams, and each novel is about animals. The Chinese Arabic one, the theme is like birds and houses, security, and so on. A forum, and we are now from a more flexible, modern, and diverse.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Trans-Himalayan literary scholars of diverse disciplinary attachment. The title of my paper is Bengali Culture in Evolution with Nepalese references. In my paper, I have chalked out a line of discourses. First, I will chat about the abstract of the paper, then Bengali culture evolving over centuries, Gangadhara Empire as named by the Greeks and the Romans, Bengal society before Aryanization, dividing a distinct cultural pattern, pre-Aryan elements transported in the philosophy of Hinduism, Lokayata and Charvaka viewpoints, original local culture under Aryan influences, Mauryan and Gupta dynasties, influences of the Pala as the promoters of classical Indian philosophy, some special features of Bengali cultures, the Muslim conquest of Bengal, the British and the Mughal periods, and finally I will conclude. I am going to the main concept of my paper. The advancement of civilization in Bengal dates back to 4 millennia, and the area where it continued to develop was familiar even to the ancient Greeks and the Romans, as we see them to mark it as the Gangadhara Empire in the earliest period of Bengal history. The area's early history featured a succession of Indian empires, internal strife, and a tussle between Hinduism and Buddhism for dominance, and sometimes a self-estimation of supremacy. The period of the Bengal, ancient Bengal, was a point of time when Bengal was the site of 4 major Janapadas or kingdoms, and it is said the earlier sites date back to the Vedic period. The ancient Bengal defined how it could be consolidated as Bengali ethnicity, which was finally formed into a national state. But reality proves that it is yet to explore, to articulate the essence of Bengalism, which endured so many difficulties of history and survived. The second title, Bengali culture evolving over centuries. Culture includes thought, lifestyle, knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, customs, and many are existing in this part of the globe. To show the courses of culture in the modern-day Bangladesh territory, it feels urgent to cover the evolution of culture over a range of time extending from the ancient Bengal to the modern period, till we come up to the time when we see Bangladesh as an undivided Bengal, including that of modern-day Bangladesh and West Bengal, the eastern part of Indian subcontinent at the apex of the Bay of Bengal, and dominated by the fertile lands of the Gangetic Delta. As we see them to name it as the Gangadhara Empire in the earliest period of Bengal history. It is in the most authentic references of history, this is a part of the oldest social way of communicating verbally among members of their community, a language which with one another with another race called Alpine. Consciousness of the people in the regions did not flourish in the broader sense. research. Despite unity as a consequence of interaction among themselves, society at that time was divided into many sects. These sort of society carried on trade and commerce. Since they were rich, they enjoyed at what particular period the different societies found pre-Aryan elements transported of the pre-Aryan and Aryan ages have later been transported in the songs sung in the praise of Lord Shiva, most as natural as the primitive one. Yet it's a manifestation of life of the locals, yet many traces of the former culture existed side by side in the ancient Bengal society. Original local culture are basic to their own way of thinking. Thus it was actually not the supremacy of the outsiders as to the great question of civilization, which India and the Gupta dynasties ruled this land from the 5th to the 3rd century BC, when the people of the Hindu and the Buddhist religions respectively used to exist in this society, though not at a large scale. There were also the people who followed the joint religion, feudalistic attitude of the ruling race, known as the Komo king or the Komo. Apart from the attitude of Brahmin Senas, who were conservative in their outlook, the religious attitudes of the Buddhist Palas appeared to be liberal to some extent. Thus, after the era of Aryan culture, another major change in culture was the mission to trace ancient Bengali manuscripts. After discovered the treasure manuscripts in 1970, all written and trimmed.
The paper will be presented by Professor Dr. Yogendra Prasad Yadav, who is also Pragya of Nepal Academy and an expert in linguistics. The topic of his paper is Linguistic Diversity in South Asia and China, a case of it.
Good morning. The title of my presentation is Linguistic Diversity in South Asia and China, and I'm going to highlight the facts of Nepal in this context. The main objectives of my presentation is to analyze the concept and rationale of linguistic diversity. Then I'll deal with the global South Asian and Nepalese context of linguistic diversity. I'll include these things: the language counts, genetic affiliations, aerial typology, and other related issues. I'll also briefly refer to cross-border and immigrant languages. And then I'll try to explain the existing debate between Sino-Tibetan and Trans-Himalayan language families. And finally, I'll focus on...
Silence, please. I request your attention.
Finally, I'll discuss the language of Nepal, namely their approximation across the various decennial censuses, genetic class affiliations, scripts, demography, major, minor categorization, documentation, language processing, language ethnicity correlation, policy, and finally the status profile. Let me try to define, earlier also a story I raised this issue, how to define the concept of linguistic diversity and other things. We may define linguistic diversity as the concentration of unique languages together in a given locale, including their traits, namely their numerical counts, genetic affiliations, linguistic features, and other related aspects. Now, what is the importance, what is the value, what is the rationale for studying linguistic diversity? How important it is? I would like to quote from Oxford Bibliographies, and it is, I quote, necessary for evolution, and the strongest ecosystems are those which are more diverse, because they imply a loss of inherited knowledge. Cultures are transmitted through languages, and languages also reflect the history of the people who have used them. And I refer to Oxford Bibliographies. Now, related to the importance, the rationale of linguistic diversity, I would like to talk about interdependence theory. Now, interdependence theory, it has been discussed in detail in David Crystal's book, which appeared in 2000, and the title of the book is Language Depth, published by Cambridge University Press. He talks about interdependence theory. He says that we have different types of diversities: biological diversities, you have cultural diversity, you have linguistic diversity, you have all types of diversity. And all types of diversities, they are interdependent, they are interrelated. If you lose one, then it will affect the existence of the other diversity. Therefore, linguistic diversity cannot be taught in isolation. It depends on biological diversity. Now, in Nepal, I think we have several languages. There is linguistic diversity in Nepal, and one of the explanations is that we also have biodiversity in Nepal. We also have cultural diversity of Nepal. So all these diversities, they are interdependent, and they go together. And this cannot be looked upon as a burden, and therefore sustainable development and SDG 4, Sustainable Goal 4. The southern side, you have lots of languages. So you can see the density of languages. Spoken in the world, 7,111 languages. This is the latest Tibeto-Burman or Sino-Tibetan languages. And one more, and she has added one more family spoken in India, and this is Andamanese. She has studied this 2019. Then South Asia as a linguistic area of languages, and South Asia has been considered as a distinct, been spoken to for more than 2,000 years. As a result, they have been in close contact and influenced one another, resulting in a linguistic phenomenon which is known as convergence. So all the languages, they converge when they come into contact. So Newari will influence Nepali they have, and in the context of South Asia. Obi constituent, they end with a verb. English, more up khanchu verb, this occurs in detail. If you have any question, I will discuss it. Indo-Atlantic area. However, there are two features, namely some languages, Tibeto-Burman languages, they are Indo-Aryan languages are Tibeto-Burmanized. So this is the kind, this phenomenon, and it was introduced by Ross. Language counts in South Asia is 664, and this is the second, and South Asia is the second in the world, in all over the world. now the language terms and the official language in this model 42 languages. 30 languages are on both sides. So these are cross-border languages. I would say that trans-similar language only. This is still hypothetical and needs further evidence for 124 languages. So the languages spoken in Nepal unwritten, but there has been a tendency to adopt Devanagari right and language documentation and electronic technology. Now we have been using digital technology to document languages.
I would like to go through page 83.
You have to introduce yourself.
Where he has, my name is Sneha Saini. I do write poems.
Any question for you?
I want to go to page number 83, where Dr. Yadav's paper is printed and he has given one table of the scripts used in Nepali written language. There he has mentioned 13 languages and their scripts. But I have not seen the script of Ranjana. Ranjana script is not mentioned in this table. I tried to read in his article also, but I did not find. Ranjana script is the script which has been submitted to UN as Nepali script. He has mentioned here Prachalit. This is one of the script of Newar, which is really popular too as a Newar's script. But I would like to mention that there are 11 scripts of Newar's of Kathmandu. I would like to request you to please mention somewhere in your paper, please. If it is already mentioned, I don't have to say. But if it is not mentioned by the person like you, it is I think it is our national property. And regarding Ranjana Lipi, now these Ranjana scripts are being used by Chinese. If you go to Tibet, even in China, we have seen Ranjana scripts. And even Taiwan, in South Korea. Now the threat is that one day it will not seen as Nepali script. So I would like to request for mentioning these scripts too. Thank you. And the one question to our Bangladeshi paper presenter, Mr. Vimal Viday. Sri Lanka, sorry. One question is how intangible heritage are, I have three questions to you. How intangible heritage are being archived in Sri Lanka? Two, despite of such orientation of Buddhism, even Buddhism orientation is in Nepal as well as in Sri Lanka too, but we both have civil war. Why could it happen? These two things. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a very complex political question.
Professor Yadav first, then our friend from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Shreji, for drawing my attention to this fact. If you look at this table in my PowerPoint presentation, Ranjana has been mentioned there.
No, it is not printed here.
Oh, it's not printed
It is
here.
not printed
Yes.
here.
So, this is the latest. This is the latest.
Okay.
Okay. Now, by the way, you said that there are about 11 scripts. I know, I'm familiar with this fact. And if you read my article, Language, chapter 4 in Population Monograph 2003, then I have mentioned several scripts used in Nepal language, Nepal Bhasha. Okay? So later, first of all, I used Prachalit.
Yeah.
Why I prefer Prachalit first? Because it has been unicodified. Right? Prachalit has been unicodified, not Ranjana. Therefore, later I realized now I should also mention Ranjana because this is also very important. So it's there, and earlier it didn't appear in the printed book. Yeah. So I agree with you that all the Nepali scripts should be mentioned. And if you read my article 2003, I think you'll find most of the scripts used in Nepal Bhasha.
Thank you, Dr. Yadav. But I think in printed form there is not Ranjana.
I accept it as a mistake.
Maybe in your article, but it isn't. It is not mentioned in this.
Yes, but this is the improved version, revised version. This is the revised version.
Okay. Professor Trivikramananda.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have two minor questions to viewer today and two minor comments on Muhammad Akbar's paper. Now regarding Buddhist, you have very beautifully discussed the Sino-Sri Lankan relations, especially the maritime relations.
Vimal Uday is not here.
Vimal Uday, very.
Oh, yes. What is why person for the is coming.
Your voice.
No, you ask the next question to our friend from
Right. I have only two minor comments on your paper, not the question one. You know that the famous manuscript, Charya Mojo, that has been discovered in the White Court of Nepal. That is not the proper name, because that manuscript has been discovered in National Archives of Nepal. And when Harprasad Shastri discovered it in 1907, at that time that office was known as the library, on the name of the former Rana Prime Minister of Nepal. So it is not proper to write White Court of Nepal. Or at one place you have written Library of the Kings or something like that. So they are not the proper languages. They are not the proper names. The present name is National Archives of Nepal, and when it was discovered, it was named as Gir Library, with the name. That is the first comment. Then the second comment is that you have mentioned in your paper about Samsuddin Ilyas, and you have mentioned that it was Samsuddin Ilyas who patronized the Bengali culture and language, right?
Yes.
And you have praised him. That is true. But so far as the Nepali historians are concerned, so far as the Nepali people are concerned, we consider him as a cruel invader. It was Samsuddin Ilyas who during the middle of the 14th century made an attack on Nepal, and he destroyed most of the Buddhist and Hindu temples in the Nepal valley, and he also plundered the property and left the country after a week of plundering. So that is the image of Samsuddin Ilyas in Nepal, whereas in Bengal he has a very good name, that he patronized the Bengali literature and languages. This is the only comment. No, if you have anything to say.
I have just a complimentary comment in reference to your comment. Yeah, I'm very much respectful to the reference you placed here, but I didn't go to any aspect related to the dignity or the political cushions of any country. I just referred to the context in which we found the work of translation and other secular activities far from the position you mentioned, and it is regrettable, and I am also very much sorry for this types of reference. It was totally against humanity, and I would like to express our hatred.
Thank you very much. But you have written what you have seen in the documents. That is okay. I don't blame you. But I have to inform you that that is the status of some areas in the history of Nepal. That's the only thing I want to do. All right. No question. No question. Okay. Now two minor questions to Vimal Mude. Now he has come. Okay. You have very beautifully picturized the Sino-Sri Lankan relations, especially the American relations during the ancient and the early medieval period, right? Up to 14th or 15th century, you have known. Now, just I want to know, what was the status of the Sino-Sri Lankan relations during the colonial period? Because you know, when the Portuguese came to Sri Lanka in the beginning of the 17th century, it was divided into three kingdoms, right? Northern, Jaffna, then Kandy, and finally the southern one. So, what was then it was followed by the Dutch and finally by the British during the 18th and 19th century. So, what was the status of the Sino-Sri Lankan relations during the colonial period? Did it continue as before, or there were some major modifications in Sino-Sri Lankan relations? Just in brief, I want to know from you. That is the first thing. Then the second thing is that actually the name of the country Sri Lanka, it was adopted only in 1970, so far as I know. And before that, it was known as Ceylon by the British, isn't it? And how did the name Ceylon came? I could not find any satisfactory answer even from the Sri Lankan scholar. But you have written in your paper that during the ancient period, the Chinese people called the present Sri Lanka as Ceylon. You have written that. Yes, I-L-E-A-N, Ceylon. Just I want to know from you, what is the literary meaning of this Ceylon? Because it is clear that the British had adopted the same name. From Ceylon, it became Ceylon, right? So what is the literary meaning of that Ceylon, which has been used by the Chinese sources or the country Sri Lanka? These are the only two minor questions. Thank you.
Is it on? Mic is on? So, no. Switch on the mic, please. Switch. Mic.
ठीक है
Sir, I am not a historian.
Sorry?
I'm not a historian.
I am only a writer, novel writer. Then I can't exactly answer your question. I think Ceylon means the Sinhalese.
So, that's all.
All right. I asked this question mainly because I have written books that was the beginning of the colonial period. There were major changes in the foreign policy of Sri Lanka, or no. And what is so with China or not? That's the only thing I want to ask. All right. But you are not a historian, but you have very beautifully picturized Sino-Sri Lankan relations during the ancient and early period.
Thank you.
I congratulate you for that. You have a very good picture of Sino-Sri Lankan relations at least during the ancient and the early period. Thank you. And what about the literary meaning of Ceylon, which the Chinese people called to Sri Lanka. You have written in your paper.
Please wait, please. Professor Yadav also is going to ask.
I have an answer to your question, which you raised not here but outside. Sino-Tibetan. Sino-Tibetan has two major branches, Tibeto-Burman and Chinese. And Tibeto-Burman has these small groups, Kamarupan, Himalayas, Wangik, Jinko, Dangish, Luis, Lolo, Burmese, Taxi, Karenek, and Bai.
What about these people and Rajara?
It belongs to Himalayas group.
Himalayas.
Himalayas.
Himalayas is the sub-branch.
Himalayas group.
Sub-branch. Is it my turn?
No, please. Professor Bhattrai, Govinda Raj Bhattrai. Then your turn. Yes.
I have a few observations and a few questions to our scholarly friends. And I support before I support him, I'd like to ask a question to Professor Yadav. Actually, all four papers were very wonderfully shaped and written. One paper by Lubin is a beautiful essay, not in a form of paper. That's all my comment about that. And three were the real papers. The other three are the real papers. And this Sri Lankan friend, scholar writer, and Bangladeshi friend writer, these two papers are almost parallel in style, because both of these write the national histories from the very beginning to date. So it is a historical, cultural, and nation formation story beautifully written, these two. There is one more question Professor Lohani will ask later on. Now to Professor Yadav, it was a wonderful paper. I was enlightened by his presentation. There are two small questions to him. Before this, there is one support to Sneha Saimi's query that in my paper yesterday, in this book itself, in this journal itself, I have mentioned that there are 6 different scripts written on the Great Wall of China. Of the six scripts, one is Vandana, which I have mentioned in my paper. I am supporting him. And to Professor Yadav, it was a wonderful paper, enlightening. 2 questions. He says immigrant language English. Why not other language? In which condition? This is one question. And second is, I couldn't understand clearly the fallen leaves model. For which languages is this model and what is the feature of the fallen leaves? Please explain these 2 queries to me. And the third question, later on, Professor Lohani will help me. I have given a small paper.
So, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I have a question here. And the question is partly a comment and partly a question also.
Sure.
Your paper is written here. Yours is a quite scholarly paper. It tells the history of Bengal, Bangladesh, Bengal culture, literature. Bangladesh is a recent name. But your connection with Nepali writers lacks coherence and connection with it. Yeah. Answer to this question. Actually, I started my writing at the very starting period of the evolution of Bengali culture. But when I came up to the Bangladesh chapter after the partition in 1947, the partition of India and Pakistan, I could not give equal importance to the parts of writings because it was to be reduced to deliver here within the time limit. That's one of the causes. And I think that this paper is not a complete one because I started on an elaborate background and I wanted to go elsewhere very farther away. That is one of the causes. And Nepali writers, though I enclosed the names in my article, names of contemporary and the earlier Nepali writers, that was just only a charge and I didn't want to enclose here. But when I thought that I'm going to Nepal and I would read it out there, so there should have been some connectivity with them. And the lists were actually taken from the internet sources, unlike the other parts of the composition of my writing. That is one of the causes. And I can express my concern and sorry for this because although I did not read this part, of the article, but it was attached when it is published in the collections of papers by the Nepal Academy. The next question is about the title. I am of the same opinion. Bengali culture in evolution with Nepalese references. I would like to change it, and I always thought that I should have done it earlier. But as I placed the name while I was in the communication with the Nepal Academy, for coming here as the invited guest, I did not send the name, but I could understand that this is not the proportionate significance share to all the parts of, especially in comparison with the sharing of the significance of the history of Nepal and Bangladesh. And that's why I praise you very heartily because your suggestion is very appreciable and thank you very much for this.
There's one more.
Oh, yes. Would you please kindly explain what you mean by the Iranian? Actually, I didn't use the term Iranian, Indo-Iranian. Indo-Iranian, the term is Indo-Iranian. And it's part of Indo-European, most probably I am confused to some extent.
There's one question from Ambassador Hiranyalal. You have also question to Mr. Akbar Hussain. Please ask your question.
Thank you, moderator. My query is for the moment after Hussain. Bangladesh old civilization, new nation. And during ancient period, we have interactions. One very famous monk from Bangladesh, Dipankar Adisha. You should mention this in your paper. It is appropriate in this seminar, China and South Asia. He came to Nepal, stayed 1 year in Tamil Bhagwan Mahal, and he built 5 pagodas in parts. This other sisters village. No, Pascal. In northern part of Kathmandu. So he stayed here and he contributed in development of Buddhism. He built these churches here in Nepal, and he went to Tibet, and he was one of the important monks from South Asia who contributed a lot in development of Tibetan Buddhism. So it was appropriate to mention his contribution while presenting the paper in this seminar. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question. Actually, trans-Himalayan connectivity, this is not based on the concept of any geographical political conception. For example, it's not especially connected with Nepal, not trans-Nepal or trans-India or trans-Chinese, is trans-Himalayan. That is, the center point is the Himalaya and the zones adjacent to it or maybe referred to as the trans-Himalayan areas. So any part of the areas or the countries adjacent to these may refer to the trans-Himalayan significances. So I cannot share equally the significances of all the aspects together because the title of my writing is broad, and I think that it should be expanded on a wider sphere. So that I could not do because it was a reduced form of my article to present here. But your suggestion is valuable, and I will think over the matter whenever I revise the article next time.
Professor Madhav Pokhrel, I have 5 questions for Professor Yadav. Do you also have a question for him or?
Yeah, I have a couple of compliments to both the presenters.
Because I want to really give a chance to all these questioners who want to ask Professor.
Yeah,
I have a question from.
I should give compliments first, and then his answer would be more appropriate, as I think. My compliments to both the presenters. First to Mr. Akbar Hussain is that in fact there are 3 or 4 trans-Himalayan rivers, which the confluence of which is Mansarovar. And one is Indus, Sindhu, second is Ganga, third is Karnali, and fourth is Brahmaputra. These rivers are trans-Himalayan, and the culture, the passage of people through these river basins has been very pertinent and archaeologically pertinent. So this should somehow be mentioned in the concept of trans-Himalayan, which unites China, or not only Chinese Tibet, but also Xinjiang of China, Western China, and besides Pakistan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh. So these countries are also united through uniting through Mansarovar and the confluence of these rivers. Another compliment to Mr. Akbar Hussain is that the Pals of Bengal, Pals were originated in the 8th century in Bengal, and they were replaced from Bengal, and later on they came to rule over Kannauj. And through Kannauj, when they were replaced from Kannauj, they came to Sinjar of Western Nepal in Jumla, Shija. And through Jumla, they went to Mansarovar. They ruled over not only to Mansarovar but also to Xinjiang, Western China. So this historical and besides, there has been archaeologically, there has been an archaeological discovery of a route, a branch of Silk Road coming through Xinjiang to Mansarovar area. And that things is, so that's why the whole of concept of trans-Himalayan can be, one of the centers should be Changchung, which is Guge, Purang, or the area which is occupied by Mount Kailash and Mansarovar. So that is my one of the comments. And another comment is, or compliment is to Professor Yadav.
Can you wait to know first you will answer your question?
No, it doesn't.
I have something to compliment.
Okay, fine.
Professor Peter Frankoman, a historian of the University of Cambridge, wrote the history of a new world, a comparatively newer world, the Silk Route, new history of the world probably, and in that book, the reflections of your comments are more clear, and I'm very much thankful to you for the reference.
Thank you. So my next compliment is to Professor Yadav. Professor Yadav, you have cited Mark Twain or Henry to define trans-Himalayan concept, which I think should include, it should be more inclusive because that has missed Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Western China, Chinese Xinjiang, including Kailash Mansarovar area, which are also, they are all a continuum. They are made up of a continuum of snow-clad mountains, Himalayan. So, if the name Himalaya is to be used, probably Hindu Kush. I don't know whether it has been, it could be included in Himalaya or not. If it could be, then all the continuum of the snow-clad mountains where the cradle of civilizations have been drawn together and there has been blending or interlinking of different territories, this should be mentioned. So that's why my request to Professor Yadav is we should also include Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Xinjiang, and these areas also, the Kunlun. So this should be mentioned in the concept of Himalaya. If we include all the continuum of all the snow-clad mountains, that's my suggestion. Thank you.
I think there are other questions for you. So now Mr. Dubinanda Dhakar, also you have a question for Professor Yadav.
I have a couple of questions to Yogindra sir. The first thing is the enumeration of languages spoken in Nepal. You have presented different estimates regarding the languages spoken in Nepal. For example, Ikonov, Census, Micronunan, and so on. I think the question is not only to look at the number of languages, but to look at which languages have been included in which list. For example, why different dialects of Tamil have been included as different languages in Ikonov, which is enumerated as a single language in census. And so on. There are three different Guru dialects mentioned in Itola, but a single language in census. So when we talk about the number of languages spoken in Nepal, we need to look at all of these things. So my first question to you is, considering the information all you have included in your presentation, could you give us a rough estimates of languages spoken in Nepal? Then my second question is related to linguistic diversity in Nepal. Daniel Natal in 1995 book, Linguistic Diversity, point out three key features related to linguistic diversity. Number of languages, one is the number of languages. Next is language families. And the third feature he points out is the structural features of different languages. Although you have pointed out some features of South Asian languages as a whole, I don't see any structural features of languages of Nepal in your paper. Would you explain some of the key features of languages spoken in Nepal so that linguistic diversity in Nepal, or one of the features of linguistic diversity in Nepal, can be explained in detail? Thank you.
Yes. Professor Yadav sir. So Yadav sir's paper is quite interesting and is very much informative. So I'm also enlightened by his paper. But one of the queries, rather than questions, is that Dr. Yadav has mentioned the languages, number of languages spoken in Nepal in page number 81 of this paper. So the languages, my query is that the languages, they sometimes in some years the languages they decrease and they increase. So how do the language, these languages in Nepal, they decrease in 1 year and then they increase in another year? So is it the, or is it because of the researchers' lack of knowledge, or it happens in the country? It happens. So why do the language they increase, they decrease, and again they increase and they decrease? So, in this paper it is given here that in 1952 there are 44 languages in Nepal. Then after 36 and 17, there were many languages in 1952, and then these languages that decreased in 1971 and other dates, according to the record. So how do the language they decrease and increase in different ages? So this is my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
That I do have is about this language count. The paper as such is pretty comprehensive and very seriously and very academically written and based on thorough inquiry. But still, what I see is that Dr. Yadav in his paper has attributed the fluctuation of language count in Nepal, not only in Nepal, in the globe perhaps, on the changes of concepts related to language and the systemic change, particularly in the case of Nepal, political systemic change, particularly in the case of Nepal. So, to my mind, this type of change in the language count appears to be more subject to emotive attachment and detachment, or I should rather, put it in a different way, linguists' infatuation towards raising or decreasing the number of languages based on their likes and dislikes, then based on some dependable and reliable statistics. So is it that this unreliability that is creeping in, which Dubinanji was referring to in case of Nepal, is symptomatic of the global linguistic, enumeration, or is it particular to Nepal? That's the issue that I really wanted to. A few days back, I went to the far western part of Nepal for this language survey, and I belong to that location. And in that location, in terms of the linguistic, in terms of the linguistic make, there is hardly any difference in the so-called languages which have found their space in national census of Nepal. I disregard the whole concept that there exists some 7 or 8 languages in that part of the country. But there were activists who came up with, burgeoning loud voices that there are several languages. So the only thing that I would love to know from Dr. Yadav is whether this is symptomatic to Nepali political thinking, or is it the global trend resulting from the deeper infatuation of the linguist towards making the number of languages high. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, the chair there, giving me a little bit of time. I actually found the paper of Professor Yadav is really comprehensive and very up to the point. And I'm not a linguist. I don't have any that kind of training. but his line of thought, the whole idea that I think it's about celebration of diversity, and it's about making the emphasis that diversity is important in terms of linguistic terms. I think it is a kind of it's an important idea in our times. I would say within our region, within this the Asia, the whole idea. It's not just linguistic, but all other types of diversity of cultures is so important. And his line that this we need to celebrate, we need to somehow preserve this diversity is also, I think, it's a political vision, important political vision for the region. I may, let me just share with you something out of, because I think all our problem is that we are subject oriented. Linguists are within the language terms. I think we have to go out of that to understand things in other perspectives, even the language, right? From anthropological, sociological, political, historical. And as I was telling that, I call myself a systems thinker. So I want to look at as from holistic kind of point of view. This this preposition, just consider what I'm going to tell you now, right? I think our spiritual sciences, what I call the ancient sciences actually, has some interesting discovery about our being here, about our life here. We have mixed up, we are confused with two terms or two concepts, the differences and divisions, right? We are different in all terms. People, we sit here, right? We are different, we are coming from, we are diverse, right? And it's natural. Differences are natural, but the divisions are socially constructed. And all our problems are related to the divisions, right? Caste, class, gender, whatever, that 12 law. So divisions. And these are man-made, socially constructed. Most of the time we confuse these two things. And we are really suspicious about diversity and we want to erase them. And it's out of, because we have been living, we are born into this divisional, ideologies and communities and things, which are discovered by Buddha and other teachers at early times, right? Growth is happening only because of sharing. Yes. You can't grow without sharing, right? Any language, any culture can grow only if there's sharing. And sharing can happen only between two different or whatever different poles. You erase the diversity, you are actually dead, We are looking always at similarities. We are very happy about similarities. We are not looking at the differences, but differences are the life. It's the life, life-giving fountain. So look at the differences and see the possibility of sharing. So the Professor Yadav has pointed out that there are languages that are right now growing, and some are vibrant, and some are dying. And you could, as a linguist, could see why this is happening. You need to look at because languages are not out there. It is about speakers. It is about bearers. So we have to look at the bearers and speakers and their context. If share with other people, other languages, right? In my own country, I have capacity to share with other regional languages. The literary has to, grow. When they were insulated, the language.
I have received a request from Manju.
Presentation of paper on linguistic. I highly appreciate Dr. Yadav's presentation of paper on linguistic. I'm not the student of linguistic, but it's quite interesting for me also. I was thinking it will be very hard to listen. I won't be able because I'm the student of literature, but it is very appreciable and quite informative and knowledgeable. And at the same time, the representatives from the different countries like Sri Lanka, China, and Bangladesh presented their papers, and they are also very highly appreciable because they also are full of knowledge and information. I appreciate them. And my focus or target points of this session is especially the focus, the target point of this session is China and South Asia Literature Forum. So I'm very much inquisitive to know about the modern trend of literature in Sri Lanka, China and Bangladesh respectively, and the relation to modern Nepalese literature. Sorry to jump to modern time instead of going to anthropology, culture, linguistic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Professor Yadav.
To the question about why Ranjana has not been mentioned. I have already replied, because in my first draft I forgot to mention it, but in my in my second, in my PowerPoint presentation, I mentioned it, so I think I can escape. Okay. The second thing, immigrant languages, not only this, there are many other languages which are immigrant languages. French, Spanish, Chinese, they have been mentioned in the census. They are all immigrant languages, not only in Nepal but also in India, Bangladesh, in other countries. So, your very interesting question was about fallen leaves. Fallen leaves. This is interesting. So, just imagine there is a tree, Sino-Tibetan. This is and there are 400 languages spoken in this family, more than 400. This is a very large, huge tree. Now, George Van Grims and others, what they discovered, see, out of these 400 leaves, there are 400 leaves. Out of 400 leaves, 42 leaves, they look different in a structure. So they have abandoned the tree and they have fallen down. And these fallen down 42 leaves, they belong to a new family. This is Trans-Himalayan language family. And I have the name. Can I read all 42 names? Better? Or it will take time. But let me give you some names. I have a list. I downloaded it from the internet. I will give it to you. The whole list. These 42 leaves, of these 40 leaves, there are Magadhi languages. You have Newari language, also Trans-Himalayan language. Then you have Kirati, and then you have Tamangi. All these languages, they are fallen leaves. Now they have fallen down from the tree of Sino-Tibetan, and now they belong to a new family, which Vandal called, and others, they call Trans-Himalayan language family. So I will show you the list later on, while during the lunch. Very interesting. Then Madhav sir, this concept, I raised this question in the very study also. This concept of Trans-Himalayan is still to be worked out. It's not final. And other areas like you said, they should also be included. And when even those who have proposed this new family, Trans-Himalayan language family, they have also said this is just a hypothesis and we are still exploring. They want some evidence-based arguments. So what they have been doing, this is not complete unless all the languages, all the 42 leaves have been adequately described. So you have to wait, just wait. And they have been doing it. Okay, I'm very curious, I'm very keen on listening to George Mandarin. He will be coming very soon here. Okay, so this is transatlantic, this is not quite clear. This is just a hypothesis. Professor Dhakal, some languages are not included. My language counts. This is not my individual language counts. This is based on the census data. Central Bureau of Statistics, they asked me to prepare an article to be published in Population Monograph on the basis of the data they have collected. So it's their data, not mine. So they gave me all the data, and on the basis of that, I identified all these languages, 122 or 23 languages. So if you listen to Michael Newman has, I think he has rightly guessed it. There must be at least 140 languages spoken in Nepal. He's guessing, and most of us agree with him. Structural features to be included. I also refer to it. Non-familiar language families, they should be described in terms of language counts, language families, and grammatical features. I have said that. But Professor Hatter will be working on this. Ruther Pokrazi, list of languages in different years, in different censuses. I gave you the reason in my power already said that it's because of the changing the concept. To not only here, but if you look at ethnologue is the list of languages all over the world, and this is done everywhere, I would say. So this is a generic reason, and a specific reason, awareness, people's awareness. People were, if you had gone to my village for language count, say some 20, 25 years ago, they would say, if you ask the question, what is your mother tongue? They would reply, my Dehati. Not Maithili, Dehati. Or Vajika. So, Theti. If you go to Sarla, Theti. They will call it Theti. So, they were not aware of their mother tongue. It's a language, it's a boli, something. So now people, especially after the democratic movements, people have been seeking their rights, awareness. They are seeking their identity, and that's why, my language is different. In Janakpur area, in Dharmsala, if you go, there were only Maithili speakers. Now you have Maghi, lots of Maghi speakers. They are asserting their rights, identity. This is one reason, okay? So these are the main reasons, why language counts have been fluctuating, continuously changing. And with this I go to Amarji. Emotional attachment, linguists infatuation. I agree. You are not the first person to
use such phraseology
to accuse us like this. Earlier also, the people have said, hey, Yadavji has increased the number of languages because he is a linguist. He is a linguist. The fact is, I told earlier that I didn't identify the languages 122 or 23 on the basis of my perception, but on the basis of census data. So if you have to abuse anyone, abuse the census. Census enumerators, they are not well oriented. They are not well oriented. So they are doing the wrong things. They have been collecting very wrong data, unreliable data. So this time also we have asked the census. Please conduct an orientation for enumerators and take the help of linguists, anthropologists, sociologists, economists, and others. So this is not linguistic infatuation. This is the infatuation of the enumerators, census enumerators. I would say, I've told them several times. They need orientation, you know. Sunil ji, thank you very much for your appreciation. I think it's important that diversity of any kind should be celebrated, and now we should not keep ourselves within the barrier of our own academic discipline. We should go beyond it, and we should look for explanation from a spiritual side or other disciplines, things like this. Dying, I appreciate this comment that some languages are dying, and it's the problem of the speakers. You also say like this: if a language dies, it's the fault of the language community, the native speakers. Native speakers are the last resort for preserving their languages. It's their property. So if the government is not preserving their languages, it's the last thing that the speech community they should preserve their languages, and this is very true. So if the speech community is not aware, if the speech community doesn't feel responsible, they don't speak their mother tongue. No, what should you do? What should I do? We can't do that. The last thing is the language community, native speakers. Manju Kanchuli, thank you very much again for appreciation. And I would like to mention it that this is a feedback, this is a support I received. This article, several articles in academia.com, and every week I receive that language use in Nepal. This is just on language use in Nepal, and this is my article published in Population Monograph 2014. And academia.com always says, this is your top paper this week. This is your top paper means most of the people read it. Thank you very much. No, I think this is one thing. Nandu Pretiji. Again, appreciation, and the cross-border languages in the north and of India that are spoken in Nepal are included here in the paper. It is possible to include the trans-Himalayan cross-border languages as examples. Yes, this is a research, ongoing research. We should wait for it. You know, I don't belong to this camp, you know. But for your information, there are two European universities where this research is being carried out. This is University of Bern in Switzerland, where George Van Dam has been teaching, and second is SWAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. At these two places, this trans-Himalayan languages are being investigated thoroughly. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Professor Yadav, for taking pains to answer all these questions. I have now only one question left, which is from Mr. Ram Binaya. His question is for Mr. Vimal Uday, I think. And it's a very short question. How has the Silk Road contributed to the cultural heritage of China and its neighbors? You want to add more?
Friends, George say that past is past, future is uncertain, and present time is most important time. our academization research is present time is very much important. I am just talking about the Silk Road. Now the here is the new version of Silk Road, and I remember the Humorous of Sri Lanka. The Western media has provocated that the Humorous port is colonized by Chinese. So it is very difficult, dangerous thing here. This type of provocation, this type of miscommunication is going on. So I would like to know, as curiosity, that what is the real things of that Humorous case? May I know about that from our Sri Lankan friends? Thank you.
This is for you.
The question is not clear.
Oh. We listen to illustrate the moving boat. It can be done by the swinging body and arms. And then if one has to illustrate the fierce fighting going on in the war, then the performer waves different flags, rolls different flags. That is how this fighting is signified or illustrated. So this is see what's it called, one table and two chairs imagery. It is a really amazing theatrical device. She also uses the word amazing. So I think, and then the last towards the end of the paper, she compares the experience, Chinese experience, with that of British experience, the two distinct cultures, how do they fuse into each other. For example, Shakespeare she refers to, and then our own experience. I really congratulate you for your paper. This is, and then now I move on to our the paper from Bangladesh. I have just noted. He says the culture of Bengal and Bangladesh is historically composite and humanistic in nature. Well, I think he tried to elaborate it in the course of his discussion. But what I really, I was going through the list of Nepali writers, and Bengali, I have nothing to say about Bengali writers, but the list of Nepali writers, the same name has been repeated twice or thrice. Perhaps you didn't do the editing. See, when you say Amar Neupane, twice. Buddhi Sagar also twice, you see. And then Krishna Dharavasi, twice. Why this repetition? You should have edited it.
It was the extra part. It was attached later on.
Okay.
And finally I read it out.
Now finally, Professor Yadav paper, I think he has already taken pains to answer questions from the floor in detail or very comprehensively. All I know, I don't want to again raise questions for him, but a portion from the concluding paragraph of this paper, I found it very interesting. I just want to read it. He says, a large number of the minority languages are still undocumented or underdocumented. All the mother tongues spoken in Nepal have constitutionally been accredited as national languages. Although in practice, Nepali alone is spoken by 44.64% of the country's total population, has been used for official and educational purposes. So then he refers to the Constitution of Nepal 2015, which had made provisions for provincial languages through the recommendation of Language Commission. I think you are also a member of the Language Commission. So,
I'm an advisor.
I see. So this way, it is a very well documented paper. I also congratulate you profusely. So in this way, we have completed presentation of 4 papers and 4 discussion also very in a positive way. I appreciate all comments from the floor and declare this session adds on, not closed, you see, because we are meeting in the afternoon. So this session is just adds on for the next session. Now, before we break for lunch, one information please. We have distinguished delegates from China and from Honorable Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor for providing me this opportunity.
Thank you, Mahesh. It's really a privilege and honor to be here and to, as I was asked to, it was totally unexpected for me to moderate this session. It was not, well, anyway, it's here now, I'm here and I'm sitting. And I hope this is the fourth session of the gathering of our deliberations. To make it very short, I don't want to actually get into any introductory notes to the session or otherwise. Yes, that's about now. First of all, the first paper in this session by Dr. Abhi Subedi, what is given is it's actually 30 minutes for the presentation, and we have another 30 minutes for discussions. So 1 hour for one paper, right? Okay. Okay, Professor. It's yeah, you are. Yeah.
I go on. Everybody is like sinking.
Okay.
Sinking. This is the proper place.
Roger.
The chair of the session, moderator, Chancellor of the Academy, professors, my guru, Mohan Sandhani, Ramjana Bhattrai sir. म बोल्दै जाँदाखेरि यो चर्किँदै जान्छ यो त स्टाइल मतलब थिएटरको Professor distinguished person here presenting the room. As given to me earlier about the medium of the seminar, which is said that it is going to be in English. Someone who makes his living by teaching English and speaks every day, that makes it easier for someone who teaches English and is supposed to make his presentation in English. Among the many topics that were sent to me to select from, the one towards the end of the list of the paper that struck as very attractive. Attractive in the sense that attractive in the sense that it brought me some new encouraging challenges. And I decided to write a paper on poetry, that also classical poetry, epic tradition, as well as poetic traditions. So I wrote a paper and sent to the Chancellor. He was a little worried about my delay in everything. And he said, you should send it by tomorrow, day after tomorrow. But this area interests me so much that I have got so much information. And I have also done some work previously. I sent him this paper which you have in front of you. But after sending him the paper, I started expanding it, adding more. So the final version is not printed, the final version is in my hand. But there is not much difference. There is not much difference in this expanded version as well. since I guess there is plenty of time, even if I read these 5-6 pages, I guess I can manage within the limited time. So that's what I will do. If it is necessary to explain, I will explain some part of it, and that I want to begin. If I find it boring to read, I'll just throw the paper and then talk. It's very boring to read whole paper and change the paragraph and so on. If I find it boring, I'll change it. I'll just talk and throw the paper. But the gist of the paper is given in the abstract which is in front of you. And I'm especially excited by the fact that this session is being moderated by a very great scientist. Not a nuclear scientist, but a great scientist from Sri Lanka. I talked to him. I'm very excited, very happy about that. Because the subject that I have selected, epic and poetry, in the earlier times, they cover not the specialized areas, but everything. Epic covered everything. Epic covered science, epic covered genealogy, epic covered history, epic covered romance, epic covered war, epic covered politics, and so on. So that's why I feel very fortunate to be speaking in a session moderated by a scientist, pure scientist, and a translator, as I have said, very renowned translator. I will read some section of it. I'll just look at my watch. Great poets, poetic traditions exist in the countries of the Trans-Himalayan region. Unlike several traditions of art and culture, the tradition of epics and poetry of shorter length have continued to be effective. Astonishingly enough, these traditions have continued to exist and impact the human minds despite the adversities and negligence that these great poetic traditions have suffered. The single reason for such continuity is the strength of these traditions and their deep impact on our cultures, behaviors, and on various forms of art that we practice and enjoy in our lives. This article examines, albeit briefly, the epic tradition of the Indic region and China, and also mentions Japan to suggest that the classical heritage of poetry has the power of reviving the lost creative moments and developing a very necessary culture of creative sharing of heritage. One broad topic entitled Enchanting Trans-Himalayan Mutual Literary Learning and Promoting People of People's Connectivity struck me when I was trying to find a motif to write for the seminar. Another attraction was the headings listed under the wide rubric. Among them, two subheadings, classical literary writings and in respective countries, and classical epics and their significance in modern times, signed with my area of interest and my karma as a literary writer, with poetry at the base of all that. The other reason is that I'm a lover of classical Chinese poetry. I carry a whole bag full of them in my car. I didn't bring them here. I read them. It's amazing. I'm a great lover of classical Chinese poetry. Any topic that one would select out of the list of the subjects chosen from different areas listed for the seminar would be challenging. Some topics would demand highly expert knowledge than the others. I have written this short paper with this conviction that the great heritage of the poetry of China and the Indic region has always, Indic region is one terminology that is used for the region including Nepal and Bangladesh as well as Pakistan. And some even consider Afghanistan as part of the Indic region. I have written this short paper with this conviction that the great heritage of poetry of China and the Indic region has always kept up the grand tradition of creativity and explorations. I will begin by examining the heritage of epics in this region. One subject that has generally evaded our attention is the question of epic poetry and its relation with other kinds of poems, which are not linear in their narrative forms and short in length. Pollock, 2018, says, and it is a common knowledge, quote, like the absence of epic in China, like the absence of historiography in India, having a cliché of Orientalism from the time of German philosopher George Friedrich Hegel, here is a divergence of genre in the two traditions that markedly contrast with what unites their lyric poetry. I guess everybody knows, is familiar with Humorous theory, in which he criticizes the Western interpretation of the Eastern countries on the basis of the reports made to them by the visitors who in most cases, produce very faulty reports, fault reports. So much so that one of the reports, what scholars were handling was that, oh, we met people in the East who have very short tails at the back. Such were the very fantastic reports. That kind of magic, wonder, surprising, as though they are not human beings, they are something very funny, human beings, half humans. And so that psyche of exoticizing, the term is, that psyche of exoticizing the people of the East was very much common in the West. That's a very great strategy of the imperialist concept of scholarship. And so that is why Pollock calls this a kind of Orientalist concept. Even Hegel was influenced by that. Hegel said the Indian don't have a sense of history. Chinese don't have a sense of poetry. In epic poetry, he said, well, Chinese didn't write epic poetry. I don't want to repeat the same thing which I am going to mention below. Pollock very rightly calls it an Orientalist cliché, a way of looking at the poetic traditions of Asia by the Western scholars. Though Pollock says there are no epics in China, there is the power of the creative energy that shapes an epic. Epic tradition of the Indic region, especially the tradition of the Ramayana, has been written and rewritten in the local vernacular languages. Bhanuvanta Acharya 1814-1866 of Nepal translated the Sanskrit Adhyatma Ramayana into Nepali. I consider Acharya as a very good translator because I didn't realize that until pretty late when they got hold of the very interesting book. How many of us have got hold of that book? A huge book, a comparative study of Adhyatma Ramayana with Bhanuvanta's Ramayana, published by the Academy. And I got it and then took it home and I was really surprised. That changed my perception about many things. Like many scholars of translation here, I am always interested in the nuances of the translation. About this translation will turn out to be accurate. How did they reinterpret it? Though Pollock says, okay, may be wrong. Are there any Chinese here? Oh, they are all Chinese. So I want to. The name also I cannot pronounce properly. Do you have the text in front of you? Anyway, let us not. Huh? Shima's point. But like the ancient European and Indic epic, it defined the past and contingent on a larger knowledge of surroundings. It's contingent. Pollock says that it is contingent on a larger, not in philosophical sense, contingency, world around it. No epic is ever written. If the epic is not written back. Chinese poetry should be seen from its pervasive nature in time and space. Of Chinese poetry from before 15th century BCE to 12th century. Sorry, I didn't bring it here, it is outside with me. Such a worldview that is remarkably familiar to us and profoundly spiritual, it says. In this book, running into, we have 3 millennia under many sections divided in activity. The other readings of the Chinese poems, like not all of them because I have added some later, timeless subtlety of expressions, and 2015 by retaining the rhythmic patterns of the book. That's also a big book. I'll show you it is with me. Manyoshu was written mostly during Fujiwara and Nara periods in Japan. The connection is very interesting. The poems reflect the life of Japan. Selection and translation of 1,000 poems from the Manyoshu. This period coincides the golden age who lived and sang. Drawing a parallel development in England, read, I find them fresh. If I find very bored and kind of a need to draw some inspiration, I read the Chinese classical poetry. They're so fresh, the clouds and the people, rivers, connectivity, and very small moments of personal connections and relations with people. Very brilliant poetry. But I read them, but I don't read Milton's Paradise Lost. Those are the student of English literature. But the Ramayana and Mahabharata, these experiments are different. The classic epic tradition of the Indic region has a binding power. The essence of the tradition is that the epics written in classical Sanskrit evoke the interest of poets to transform them into the vernaculars and to interpret the macro forms into micro forms. Such translations are printed in books, but they retain the orality. The strength of repetition and the singing of the epic verses even today. The oral epic, even going through a process of printing and getting couched into the language of the canon, make their way back to orality. This is a very interesting phenomenon. For example, I have given an example here. When these classical, canonical epics were written or translated, whatever, they went back to the oral domain. For example, I just want to read what I have written earlier and published in a Sharp magazine book. I have quoted it from there. Epics written according to the literary and printed form go back to the oral tradition, but when they do, they assume the form of the folklore epic, which does not follow the rule of the scripted version. Those who take the scripted epic may be bards or troubadours, known as Gaine in Nepal. I want to cite from my earlier writing, which is published in a book in Delhi in 2010. I have written, I want to show that the available folk variants of the Ramayana, especially the Lok Ramayana, Kusmakar Neupani has done a very important work in this. I have drawn a lot of examples from Kusmakar Neupani. Ramayana breaks what Bakhtin calls the monologic form of the epic and transforms it into the dialogic form. Sorry, I don't want to explain all these Bakhtinian and etc. Otherwise it may sound like. And adapting to local and indigenous forms. But a study of the folk Nepali Ramayana epic, maybe the troubadours Nepal, known as Gaines, has shown that the folk forms have evolved out of an interpretive adaptation of the Nepali transcreation. Because they use Bhanuvata translated from Adhyatma Ramayana into Nepali very freely, very powerfully. Now I know, I have read quite a lot, compared it with the Adhyatma Ramayana. Amazing. I would advise you, if the book is still available, academic got a फायदा के छ भने किताब बिक्री हुँदैन जहिले गएर भेटिन्छ. Because they don't get sold, so whenever you go, the books are already there. त्यसो भएको हुनाले त्यहाँ गएर त्यो लिएर हेर्नु होला. And then the Essay. That is how they transformed it into song. But they use Bharabhakta's Ramayana itself into their song. Talk about the epic traditions. We cannot stay with the classical form and their translation. We should look at the dynamics of the epics, how epics change with the people, with as. There would be no epics, for example. And then, so much so that the epic temptation, the Shashi Tharoor, an Indian scholar, has appropriated a Mahabharata epic for the purpose of writing a satirical novel about the contemporary times of the. What is the city? Shashi Tharoor has written the liminal, this Mahabharata, the great Indian novel, he calls it, and he has written the Mahabharata. It's a Mahabharata, Shashi Tharoor Mahabharata. So this is the way, it may sound a little funny, and with Hobi ke Baba calls it a kind of, यता अंग्रेजी को criticize गर्यो, criticize the English language and the English civilization, but using the English language itself. So Hobi ke Baba calls this a kind of a sly kind of a civility. It's a sutuk pasara, civil when you अंग्रेजी use it. So they have used it, and P. Lal of Kolkata did the same, and then several friends of mine in Bangladesh, the other delegates here from Bangladesh, they have staged the Mahabharata plays in Bangladesh a number of times. And the cinemas are made. Very interesting cinema. Cinema ko pura garda arko jancha bata. And then that kind of reading, Mahabharata cinema. This history of the epic imaginaire is important in South Asia. If the subject is considered bigger, and if the protagonist is a person whose action deserves great admiration, and whose deeds are supposed to change people's behavior, he or she is considered an epic character. And last one, is there any kind of a Nepali imagination of the Chinese heroes, epic imagination? Are the Chinese imagine anything, any epic hero about us? One very spectacular, very interesting, powerful epic came out some years ago. That is the epic written by Satyam Mondai about Arnico. He has written an epic. I find that remarkable. He has written this remarkable epic because there is no epic character to connect China and Nepal. There are many epic characters to connect us with the South Asian countries. But there are no epic characters that connects us with the Chinese. The India with the connect even Bhimsen is enough. Delhi में मेरा scholar temple, Mahabharata मेरा you are wrong. Mahabharata is ours because Bhimsen came to Nepal. Bhimsen take a dunga hamra sadai chha. There are stones where he stepped. There are marks of Bhimsen's footmark. Because that's a stupid discussion. So there is a collective. But then there are no connections with China. So Satyamandai found a Nepali artist as a hero of the epic proportion. And has written a very beautiful epic. The epic is very interesting. He becomes so popular. The king, Gullah Khan in the palace, the queen, liked him so much that he got him married to one of her relatives, Katie. That's the samosa. So he has elevated him to that position. And described his quality, and he became the Satyamandai has given him some kind of a Chinese royal nata hariyako nata halinu. So that is how he created an epic out of that. So that epic is available. Arniko Swet Chaitya Bhani kitab based, and this one, so on, I don't want to, now time is finished. The Nepal China epic imaginaire, I have called it. And then I have closed the paper by saying that the impact of classical poetry of any place and language is most strongly felt by the communities addressed by those works. What is known as classical poetry should not be seen as fossilized creative formations of the past. You have a mistake. Epic is not a fossilized. It's not a fossil. Fossil over it, don't talk about it. If it is not fossil, use it. Like Peter Brook, Peter Brook has written Mahabharata, a play based on Mahabharata. It is displayed everywhere in the world. In France, Abignova, Hernoga, where he staged Mahabharata, Peter Brook. So Peter Brook has staged Mahabharata. That Mahabharata is not any dharmic, any religious book. Mahabharata is not a religious book. Not being a very religious person myself, the value of Mahabharata is very different to me. The value of Mahabharata is very different. Like Peter Brook's importance is very, very different, so it is huge. And it seems if we are not careful about recognizing and using the poetic traditions, we might realize one day that we have run out of the creative sources of strength. Evoking the poetic traditions that include epic and shorter poetic forms is tremendously effective in education, cultivation of creative literary spirit, and above all, in establishing great creative bonds among the cultures, people and arts in this or any other regions of anywhere in the world. Thank you very much. But this is a very elaborated and refined essay. I'll send it to you if you are going to use it.
Correct.
Only you have to add it.
Add it.
Sir. I have added many things.
Thank you.
And I'll send it. If you need it, if you don't.
Okay, if you have
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Abhishek. And Trans-Himalayan Classics and Poetic Literature. You just heard the professor. Although it's a short paper, it's dense with insights and also the cross countering the Orientalist ideas of thinking of the Asian heritage, the Trans-Himalayan heritage, Indic, the continent, and the China. And I'm not going to even try to condense it and present it again. I just want to tell you that Professor was alarming and he was convincing us to be careful, concerned about these poetic traditions shared by huge amount of people. I have some questions to ask you later. One I just posed, now the Indic traditions that you were referring to, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and you were just telling that they were oral traditions as well. While they were, and then because of oral traditions, then were converted to the songs and all that. That poetic traditions were shared by many people, even the very say in that sense, the lowest levels. What about the Chinese poetry, the Li Ku and all who shared that immensely interesting culture? Was it only circulated among elite, or was it has been shared by the large amount of people?
That's a good question. Good question means difficult question. The meaning of because before I joined Edinburgh University, I didn't know the meaning of good question is difficult question. When someone asked the question, everybody said good question. No, excellent question. Whenever it's difficult question. This is a difficult and very important question. Very important question. The one I have written but could not read out is that in China, the printing came very early. Printing came very early when the poets of the court wrote poetry. These poems are printed, actually. And as a matter of exigency, need, people started reading slowly. Because it is a printed form, you have to read slowly and with kaida with grace and slowly. That is why Chinese poetry did not allow epic this kind of a anarchist kind of a expansion, because they were supposed to be limited to the printed form, and that remains even today. But that's the very good question part is, difficult part is, was the poetry as in Indic tradition shared by many? It seems the Tuhu and others, this poet's poetry, were very widely shared by people. And not in the same sense as Mahabharata and Mahabharata. You are very right. That's why I said this is a good question. Not in the same sense. It's a kind of form. It's a very kind of refined form, artistic form. It was not very widely shared. But then it was read very widely, extensively. They had literature.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I just use my privilege to ask a question. It's not yet not opening the floor for you because I think better we go through the other papers and then we'll open the floor for the discussion. Shall we do that way? Or? Yeah. Thank you. Now, actually, I'm not very clear who will be the second presenter. To my understanding, we should be either our colleague from Maldives, Mrs. Rafi Abdul Gadir, or Li Chen from China. Li Chen in China. Who will be the presenter? No, not reported here. So, yeah, will you come here? Will you come to the room? Just give me brain the Vehi language, right? Yeah, okay. And she's the vice president of the Vehi Language Academy, and she monitors all activities carried out at the Academy under the supervision of the president. So she's in a privileged situation, but also she's an academic, and today she's, well, you're invited to make your presentation. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, she will be talking about folk narratives of different countries. Is that so? Yeah, that's so about folklore and folk narratives, some compared to study areas. Yeah. Okay. Also, you are given 30 minutes. All right, thank you.
The management of Nepal Academy, distinguished delegates. Distinguished delegates and scholars, professors, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. It's a great pleasure participating in this conference, Second China South Asia Literature Forum 2019. The papers are very interesting and academic. In my paper, I will be focusing on some folk narratives of Maldives. I will be focusing on some similarities and differences between some Maldivian folklores in neighboring country. Maldivian folklore is the body of myths, tales, and anecdotes belonging to the oral tradition of Maldives. The Maldives lies in the warm equatorial area of the Indian Ocean, surrounded by deep waters. This nation is made up exclusively of coral atolls. There are thousands of small, flat and sandy islands with only about 200 of them are inhabited. The Maldive Islands, known by Maldivians as Divahirajah, has been continuously populated for millennia. Therefore, The folklore of these islands is very ancient. Many stories encompass two or more categories, and as they were intended to be handed down from the older to the younger generation. Most stories usually contain a moral lesson for islanders. These are folk tales which are similar to other countries. In some of the stories only the character differs. Many of the stories have a connection to some other South Asian country, especially neighboring countries like India and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. There are different categories of stories such as cares, spirits or monsters, long fairy tale style myths, stories involving humorous characters, fables with the locals, animals, seafaring stories and chronicles of semi-historical events. We have numerous stories in the Maldivian oral tradition, but only a very few of them are written down. Usually, folk tales are told by storytellers who are invited to entertain the audience of an island household where several generations are living together under one roof. The storytellers were mostly men, with the exception of the occasional woman. Since there are a number of islands in the Maldives archipelago, many of the local tales and legends have different versions according to the particular atoll or island, and it differs from storyteller to storyteller. There are famous legends like Domheda and Alifuru Domhona Mieru, Hantigador Domkamana that have managed to survive, and these stories are printed too. In the 1990s, these stories got renewed fame among Maldivians and we were even broadcasted by Radio Maldives. The 18th and 19th centuries shows a flourishing of trade between Maldives and main harbors of British Empire, foremost of which were Calcutta, Bombay, Cochin and Galle. That through some Maldivians travel for education to different cities of the subcontinent where they sought the environment of Muslim communities. They were learned mainly Urdu, a language easily translated into our own language. Our own language, Divayi. Because of linguistic affinity, several secular stories as Birbal Wazir, Juha and Bodgoda made their way to the Maldives through Urdu trained scholars. There are different categories of folk tales, tales of spirits or monsters. These most popular and enduring tales of the Maldives law are about evil spirits and their interaction with the islanders. In this type of stories, a certain pattern of behavior becomes necessary in order to avoid trouble with the spirit world. Actions like staying at home and avoiding certain places at night, such as the cemetery, is among them. In the mythology of Maldivians, the Pandita man, sorcerer, who knows the art of magic, is always portrayed as a hero. He would be an educated and respected person, and he would know how to get rid of the spirit. Handi is another name in the prominent figures of Maldivian mythology, appearing as a very beautiful woman dressed in red and smelling like the sweet scented flowers which she often wears in her hair. The Handi is usually described as gentle and a thing of beauty. There are few tales such as the Full Handi, in which she appears in a fearsome creature or head with unkempt hair and sharp fangs. Another female character is Minikadata, the cannibal aunt, who spirits which are subjected to many folk tales in the Maldives are various versions of the Fureta. With this monster, they either come from the ocean waters or dwell in burial grounds. Popular long story that has been ever present throughout other countries of the Indian subcontinent and the Southeast Asia. These are the tales about young princes and beautiful heroines, in which the spirits and sorcery themes is not central but plays a secondary role. The most significant is Donghelea Alfur, the story about the ordeal of two good-looking lovers, which is a much distorted, modern version of Ramayana myth of India. In this long narrative, where the king is the villainous character, one cannot avoid. But notice that there are many similarities with Ramayana. This Indian great epic strongly influenced the folklore not only of the subcontinent but also of many Southeast Asian countries. The third one is stories with humorous characters. Stories with humorous characters like Makumbe, the eater, first Makulunge, first the police and the five thieves, often involves humorous situations. They give us a glimpse of the way of life in Maldives when the archipelago was a kingdom. In some stories, we learn about the life at the court in Mali, the capital of Maldives, and the relationship between the king of the Maldives and his subjects. Fables with animals, the fourth one. In addition, cats, fables, and sayings for fish, crabs, and seabirds are the heroes introduces us to the local fauna of the atolls. The larger wild animals do not exist in the Maldives but owning two continuous trade visits with the neighboring countries. Elephants, tigers, and many such animals are known. These stories are adapted to the local environment and several of these fables are derived from Jatakas and Panchtantra, a clear indication of the ancient Indian collections of tales spread throughout Asia. The legend of the Virgin and the sea monster told in the context of the conversion of the country to Islam originated in the Panchtantra. This legend is one of the few items of the Maldivians oral tradition that has mentioned by travelers, and it was put into writing both in local and in foreign publications. The fifth one is Seafaring Stories. This theme has a central role in many stories. Maldives is a seafaring and fishing country where ships have always been important. These kind of stories illustrate well the background of the Maldivian as seafarers seasonally sailing across the Indian Ocean to trade with neighboring countries. Not only are different type of vessels frequently mentioned in most stories, but also popular Divi proverbs feature in ships of Maldives. The sixth one is chronicles of semi-historical events. There is a limited amount of local historical data in the oral tradition of the Maldives. One famous incident is monsters of Nimiti. There are people who has experienced this episode personally. In my paper, I did some comparisons of Maldivian folklore with other countries. The first one is Randamari. She asked the king to release her father exiled. Release her exiled father. There are another story, Donghelea, and also this is very much striking to Ramayana. I will just point out some points, not all of them. The main plot narrates the kidnapping of a woman of extraordinary beauty by an evil king, which is basically the same as the Ramayanas. The heroine of the Indic epic Sita was born supernaturally from the earth when her father King Janaka was plowing. After seeing a spirit in a dream that commanded him to do so, in the Indian epic Rama was exiled from his own kingdom by his father's orders, following the wish of Janaka's description of Sita's beautiful feature to her brother King Ravana. Aliflu determinedly faces the king when he comes to fetch Donghelea by force, a rare display of courage in a country where fear of the ruler is paramount. His personality corresponds with that of Rama in the Ramayana, where Rama is a fearless hero, unafraid by any obstacle or threat from the beginning to the end. Donghelea and Aliflu's strong love for each other, their faithfulness and determination to be reunited after separation, and the Radun's careless flouting of the vows that bind together a man and a woman in marriage are well within the main argument of Ramayana. The attitude of Donghyela during her captivity at the king's palace in Malé, where she contemptuously ignored the Radon's approaches for such a long time, is different with Sita's behavior while she was under Ravana's power. Similarly, the Radon's attitude is exactly like King Ravana's, as he didn't try to take Hyela forcefully. Instead, he put her under surveillance and hoped to gain her heart with the passing of time. There are other similarities in these stories, however, no names of the original Ramayana characters are identifiable in this divine story, and although some sequences of the similarities pointed out about correspondence to the order to the Ramayana, the original narrative which gave to the origin to the Donghyela and Alfur stories has been lost. In the story of Donghyela and Alfur, the arrogant, lustful and cruel dominant of Malé is at least considered to be a human being and not a demon, unlike in the Ramayana where Ravana was a demon king. The other story is Fulodighandi. Fulodighandi means it's a long navel. This story is also, I will just read few things. This is more from the mythological point of view, for they provide very important clues about ancient Maldive beliefs. Both in generation to generation, a story told orally by the elderly to the children. As the times changing, the modern day children now has their own ways to keep them entertained. Folktales are at the brink of extinction. Therefore, to have printed versions of these tales is of utmost importance in order to pass in the Maldivian culture and heritage to the younger generations. As Maldives is an archipelago of islands, travel into various islands to record these stories and collect from the elderly persons is a huge challenge, not to mention the cost of travel and logistics. Somehow there is this Fulodighandi story, we have a song we'll play for a few minutes. It's for
Time to respond, thank you.
Can we, have you finished?
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Thank you. Time for when you have time to interact, but we need to listen to the third paper, the presenter. You are here, no? Mr. Lee Chang, you are there. Would you like to? Yeah. Would you like to stay there and present your?
I'll stay here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Then his topic is strengthening literary translations and promoting the exchange of civilization. That's again, yeah, we are going looking at the translation big area. Yeah, you are, yes, please come with your presentation. Thank you.
女士们、先生们，大家好！在发言之前呢，我先刚刚苏贝迪先生在演讲当中提到了中国的《史记》，我当时没有反应过来，对这个苏贝迪先生渊博的文化以及对中国文明的了解表示感谢。
So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my
honor to speak here. And first of all, I'd like to say something about the speech of the Minister of History. And just now, he mentioned the great historian of China, Sima Qian, and his historic book. And at that time, I wasn't able to react to his words. I just want to say I really appreciate his knowledge and understanding about Chinese culture.
我是第一次来尼泊尔，我心里非常高兴。这个高兴呢，绝不是一句客套话。
This is my first time in Nepal, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm not saying this just with a state of mind.
因为这是一个美丽的国家，与我们的中国山水相连。
This is a beautiful country with wonderful natural landscapes and sharing mountains and rivers with China.
这两天呢，我也见到了很多发自内心的微笑、美丽的面孔。
And during last 2 days, I have seen so many sincere smiles, cordial greetings, and kind faces of sincerity.
更因为结识了许多新的朋友，也见到了好几位老朋友，有尊敬的布普雷蒂院长，吉米尔李世儒先生，乌莎塔库尔女士，沙利女士。
And I have met old friends and I make new friends here this night again with Dr. Vishnu Jimayer, Professor Dr. Usha Thakur, Ms. Shashi Chalia, and our old friend, Honorable Chancellor of Nepal Academy, Kangat Prasad Upuri.
我先介绍一下自己，我有2个身份，一个呢是中国作家协会的工作人员，为文学服务、为作家服务是我的职责。
Please allow me to introduce myself first. I have 2 identities. One of them is a staff member of the China Writers Association, and my job is to serve the writers and authors.
我非常热爱这份职责，同时我也是一位小说家。
I'm fond of my responsibility. Besides, I'm also a fictionist.
我的英语不好。但是今天我的演讲主题是关于翻译，请允许我用汉语来完成我的演讲，这样呢也更有国际会议的一种气氛，也更能体现出翻译的重要性。
Though my English is poor, I take the liberty to say something about translation. So please allow me to read my paper in Chinese. This will provide a kind of international atmosphere of cultural diversity, as well as to highlight the importance of translation.
我的演讲稿在第31页。
And you can find the English version of my paper in page 31.
2年多前，我从事对外文学交流工作之后，接待的第一个外国作家代表团，就是以尼泊尔学院副院长乌帕德亚为团长的尼泊尔作家代表团。我陪同7位尼泊尔作家诗人访问了北京、昆明和成都3类各具特色的城市。朝夕相处的7天，我们结下了深厚的友谊。我力求把接待工作做到天衣无缝，但是天有不测风云，7月的北京正是雷雨季节。由昆明飞北京时，航班延误了6、7个小时；由北京飞成都时呢，航班延误长达13个小时。我们2次登机，又2次被请下飞机，继续着遥遥无期的等待。想到尼泊尔作家朋友们在第2天将在成都离境，可是大把的时间就这样浪费在机场。作为陪同人员，我心里能不急吗？看着我心急如焚的样子，反倒是尼泊尔作家朋友们一个一个过来劝我，告诉我，人的一生，什么事情都有可能碰上。经历过2015年的大地震，与那些死难者比起来，我们现在多等一等，又算得了什么呢？ 我始终记着这句话，也始终记着我从事对外文学交流工作的良好开端是尼泊尔作家朋友们给予的。在那7天的交流中，尼泊尔作家朋友们非常关心中尼两国文学作品的互译。我了解到，鲁迅的很多作品，毛泽东主席的不少诗词都已经翻译成尼泊尔文，为广大尼泊尔人民熟知和喜爱。同样，也已经有很多尼泊尔作品翻译成了中文，如尼泊尔诗人德福科塔的长诗《木纳比马丹》在中国就非常受欢迎。我还了解到，尼泊尔学院有一本刊物叫《翻译》，就是致力于将世界各国优秀文学作品翻译成尼泊尔文的刊物。关心文学作品互译的不只是尼泊尔。在之后2年多时间里，每次与外国作家交流时，谈的最多的就是文学翻译，这让我更加意识到文学翻译在推动文学交流中的重要性。在人类历史上，翻译在传播人类文明成果、沟通世界各民族文化视野方面起到了媒介和桥梁作用。在中国，翻译促进文化交流发展的起源大概要追溯到东汉至唐宋，大量的印度梵文佛经被译成汉语，使佛经和论2种文体及许多佛教词汇，必融入了汉语里面。到了近现代，鲁迅、周作人、朱自清、郭沫若等名家大师，往往是通过林书的翻译小说与世界文学开始沟通交流和对话。作为中国介绍西方现代文学的第一人，林书以耳受笔追的方式翻译了11个国家107位作家的180余部作品。这些文学作品不但使中国人认识了外国文学，同时也促进了中国文学的发展。文学的影响是相互的。美国诗人艾斯拉庞德热爱中国文化，中国文化对于他就像水之于鱼。他感觉从中国文化中发现了另一个希腊，他把中国的许多唐诗译成英语，虽然其中充满了许多误译，许多句子的英文文法都不通，但是他的英译唐诗却引发了20世纪美国的一场新诗运动，具有明显的文学史上的意义。文化是习得的，只要是一种有生命力的文化现实被另一种文化理解和接受，就可能走进另一种文化，成为该文化的一部分。而翻译在其中所扮演的桥梁作用，就使得天堑变通途。文学翻译不仅仅是一个语言问题，而是一个跨文化问题。语言、文化、翻译三者紧密联系，不可分割。中国文学与南亚国家的文学同属于世界上最悠久、最古老的东方文学，有着源远流长的文学传统。在数千年的发展过程中，许多国家与民族的文学巨匠不断涌现，优秀作品浩如烟海。古今大量名家名著已成为全人类文学艺术的典范。东方文学的形成与发展同西方殊异，具有多元性和个性突出的特点。多元性的古代东方文学呈现出多元化的发展格局，也形成了各文化圈文学独有的特质和差异。西方往往认为东西方由于语言和思维上的差异而不可能进行真正的对话。德国哲学家海德格尔认为，语言不同，思维方式就不同，对世界的认知也不同。一种文化的特质和精神，只能用他自己的语言才能表述，用其他语言无法表述。保守的西方学者还会质疑跨文化理解的可能性，认为用西方的思维模式永远无法理解中国，甚至两种文化之间无法相互理解。19世纪末，英国诗人吉普林曾经在《东西方歌谣》中写道：“东方是东方，西方是西方，两者永远不会相遇，直到天和地会在上帝面前接受审判。”这2行诗暗示了东方和西方迥异的思想文化，预言二者的差异永远无法融合。东西方之间能否实现跨文化理解呢？显然，西方有些理论夸大了语言中那些不可议的成分，从而忽略了东西方思想中契合的部分。了解中国传统文化的人都知道，自古以来受儒家思想的鼓励， 中国文学一直就具有深厚的现实主义传统。先秦诸子百家争鸣时，儒家就首先提出文以载道，这也成为后世整个古代文学的基本精神。对我而言，我的业余时间主要就是2件事：读书、写作。读别人书中的人物，他们成为了我的伙伴，按照自己的个性在书外继续着他们的生活、他们的故事。写作则更是一种自由的创造，创造出更契合我的人物，让他们成为我生命中的一部分。正是为了更具现实感的陪伴，我的创作总是着力于当下这个时代，总是以一种最平。
That's also suggestion from the floor. Can you just a little bit cut down the Chinese present part of the Chinese presentation? We can go by 2 ways. One is just to give some time to the
这与中华民族几千年的基础上相互尊重、彼此借鉴、和谐共存，这个世界才会更加丰富多彩、欣欣向荣。我们延揽了一批世界各国的文学解决文学翻译中遇到的沟沟坎坎，为文学翻译的理论和实践积累了丰富而宝贵的经验。这些汉学家以越来越多的创作和翻译的日常中去。就算是远隔重洋，也不是无法逾越的障碍。作者和译者不仅把手紧紧挽在一起，也把情谊是人类共同的情感，而且让这种情感跨越地域和文化的差异，被广大的读者所接受。在人类命运紧紧相连的新时代，承认他者权利，尊重不同价值体系，将成为新时代的新意愿思维，取代文明冲突论的预言。世界在相互理解和相互包容中达到文明互鉴、和谐共存，那将是一个多么美好的世界！最后，我希望中国和南亚各国之间的文学交流会更加深入、持久地开展下去。
Okay, so finally, I sincerely expect that the communication and the literature exchange between China and South Asia could be carried out efficiently and continuously.
中国有句古话叫做"3年不上门，亲戚也不亲"，好邻居要常走动。
There is an old saying goes like this in China: without visiting for 3 years, even your closest family members will become afar. So it is important for friends and relatives to visit each other frequently.
所以热诚地欢迎南亚各国的朋友有机会能到中国参观访问，让我和我的同事有机会为大家服务。
So sincerely, I welcome all of the visitors from South Asia to visit China, so that my colleagues and I have the opportunity to serve all of you.
中国还有一句俗语叫做"一回生，两回熟"。
Another old saying in China is the first time a stranger and second time is a good friend.
希望我们再见面的时候已经是老朋友，希望我们的友谊地久天长。
So I hope that when we meet with each other again, we'll be good friends and our friendship will be eternal.
用我刚刚学了的一句尼泊尔语表示一下我最后的心情。
So I just want to end my presentation with Nepalese word I just learned.
Thank you very much, colleague from China. And he also came up with a very important paper with the important theme: strengthening literary translation and promoting the exchange of civilization. Actually, we have been looking into this area, the whole intercultural communication within the region from yesterday. It's almost, touches almost of our papers touch that big topic. And our colleague Li Chan actually cut across the Orientalist or extremist idea of relativism, that the different cultures, it's difficult to meet, the different cultures cannot meet, or it's impossible to meet each other. The communication is difficult, but actually he very fluently, very conveniently cut across that argument and establishes the very basic humanistic idea about the humanity, the possibility of intercultural communication and intercultural and sharing the literary heritages within the region. And actually, I think we can. This is a so interesting paper for Sri Lankan as well. We know in the Axel age, this big area produced so many important teachers like Lao Tzu and Gautam Buddha from Nepal to give answers about our being here, the purpose of our being here. And that was a great humanistic heritage that we share with China and South Asia. I think all that, what this paper presents is about the importance and possibility and necessity of exchange and possibility of translation of the heritage, the knowledge, the insights to other cultures. One cultural product should be converted or put into the other culture and exchange. Thank you very much. So we have now finished with 3 presentations. All are in their own way interesting, and it's up to our big team. I ask you to send me here your queries, notes in written form. Then we could try to manage. I think there's time. We have 1.5 hours for the whole discussion. And starting from the presentation and looking at the Professor Abhisubedi's presentation, and then Maldivian colleague's presentation, and this Lishan's presentation. Your queries or commentaries or comments or questions to presenters. We have time. We have some time for the floor, for the plenary discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. He wants to make a compliment on the paper by Professor Abhisubedi. Yes, please. Yeah, please.
And Mr. Lichan. So, to Professor Abhisubedi, I am very fascinated by his presentation every time he presents it. So besides, I have compliments to his paper. But let me call your attention to the greatest epic of the world, King Kesar. That is the greatest living epic in the world, and that epic is being sung by folk people, where it is spoken as a folk song, Gatha, from Mongolia to Tibet, and so it is sung even in Pakistan, India, Nepal, Tibet, China, and up to Mongolia. So this King Gesar in China, when I was in China, I have read about the greatest epic of the world, King Gesar, where the Chinese government, they have found one person who could sing, who could spell the whole narrative of King Gesar, and Chinese government has collected or archived in 31 big volumes of King Gesar. So probably that is the greatest achievement or greatest thing we should mention in when your paper is published. I hope that should be done.
What's the spelling?
Gesar. In Chinese they write Gesar, but the pronunciation in Pakistan is King Gesar. Hamre Gesar. Hamre Gesar. King Gesar. So that is one of the things which should be mentioned. The second thing is in China, as you have mentioned that because of printing press, there is virtually no folklore or no folk song because everything is printed, and in this region China has this belief that they have the continuous documentation of the objective history for 5,000 years. So everything is documented in China. So that's it. Nothing is for the Lokit or folk song. So they know who is the writer, who wrote it, so everything. So that's why as you have noted that the presence of folklore in China is a very difficult thing to know. But besides it, they have a very beautiful story of how Swen Chang traveled during the Tang period, how Swen Chang traveled from Xi'an to all over Central Asia, to India, to Nepal also, and they have a narrative. In Chinese they call it Xiyoji. The Xiyoji means journey to the west. So that in that folk narrative, they have in fact blended even the Ramayana. So there is a Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong is a person who is a duplicate of Hanuman. And even so these things are, I think, worth mentioning in your paper when it is published. So that is my compliments to Professor Vishwet. Besides, how about Lit Singh? Can I add to?
Yeah, please just
Yeah. So that is going to China because there is no other country as close as China, and the door to Chinese government or Chinese country from South Asia is still to open. There were branches of Silk Road also. One branch of Silk Road was passing from the Xinjiang to Karnali. Xinjiang through Karnali to India, and we can promote those historical routes also. That is my suggestion.
Okay,
Thank
you very much. I suggest this way. Now there is another query for Professor Sugedi, so we'll take from that. So you can respond first, right? Then we'll come to the relations and we'll keep your responses.
I only compliment.
Okay, right. Thank you. Okay, this is.
And you have mentioned that Bhakta Acharya is a very powerful translator or transcreator, and you also mentioned about the Ramayana. If I remember, I would like to recite a verse from Ramayana. This is in Srakdara Chanda, which is considered as the longest Chanda. Sita jila yimalle chinikana manama matripad buddhi garado hatle maile sudama अनुचित छ भने स्पर्श केही नगर्दो आफ्ना नक्सल जमिनमा धसिकन जमिनै जल्दी हातले उठायो सीताजीलाई रथमा धरिकन दगुर्यो रामदेखि छुटायो. How powerful is translation? Maybe Professor Ravi Shivedi can explain much than I can do. But I have a query that I was expecting when you were talking about the Trans-Himalayan classic and poetic heritage. There should have somewhere you have mentioned about Gita. It was my expectation, because Gita is considered one of the very philosophical and also the pragmatic type of epic. That's why it has some missing part, I feel that. And also there are some other people who have translated Gita, just like Komal Gita and the other also. Devkota has also translated Abhigyan Sakuntalam of Kalidasa in Sakuntal. It is not translation, it is not, but it can be considered as transcreation. That's why if you would have incorporated some others, it would have been much comprehensive. It is my thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Visubedi. You can just respond if any.
Vidhanacharya Bhai's suggestion are also very interesting. The question is one of methodology. When you are talking about epic, heritage, and the practice, poetic practice within cultures, we have to face two problems. One is, when does epic become history? Is there any kind of a contact zone, as Mary Louise Pratt says, contact zones, when different cultures travel to do we have any contact zones between history and epic imaginaire? That is one thing that literary scholars have to sort out and discuss. The other thing is, have the epic text, once canonical text, in course of time, through their different formations and appropriation, have played any significant role in later times in written forms, as I cited the example of Shashi Tharoor and others. How much of that impact is there? And the question is one of canon and the use of the epic tradition. And that is one thing that we have to, that is the subject of the discussion. And the other thing that comes in with this discussion is the folklore. The folkloristic discussion is very right in South Asia, in Central Asia. When I was in Kazakhstan, they were talking about one tradition. The tradition, maybe the same, I'm asking the spelling of the whole story of that story, folk story shared in the whole region, even from Turkey, that it is very pervasive. I didn't want to go into that because that I will not be able to manage, and then that will be not my focus of my paper, but one should acknowledge that there are many traditions that epic tradition. But one thing struck me, that in that other annals story there is the mention of Ramayana also. That's a very interesting part. Otherwise, it is mere Buddha Namaira. To talk about that, there is someone like Tulsi Vasdai and folklorists may not be able to talk. But that's a very interesting suggestion. I'd just like to look into that also, without making my own life very difficult by including that and not being able to explain that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. Point like. Now there is another, there's a question by Professor Yadav, Yogindra Yadav, to Chan, right? Please, Professor, your time. Yes.
This is just a small query for me. If you look at seminar papers on page 33. Page 33. This is almost the last para on page 33. This refers to the magazine People's Literature. This is offered, this is translated into different versions in 10 foreign languages. 10 foreign languages. This is a very promising, I think, project. And I very much appreciate it, but I want to know about its procedure. How is it done? Is it done manually or mechanically?
Excuse me, do you mean that it is done by a group of people or some?
Or machine, computer.
Okay, got it. 李成先生，在您的演讲中，您提到中国最有影响的文学杂志《人文学》已经开办了10个语种的外文版，我觉得这是一项非常鼓舞人心的成就。就像我想再知道点细节，比如说这10个语种是一项很浩大的工程，是怎么做到的？这是人翻译的呢，还是机器翻译的？
首先，这个事情确实如您所说，是一件非常浩大的工程。
Okay, so as you stated, this project is complicated.
我们也不是一口吃不了的胖子，所以呢，我们也不是一下子来完成的。我们是成熟一个语种，我们来做一个语种。
You know, just like Roma isn't built within one day, we just deal with it step by step, like finish one language first, then another successively.
以英语路灯为例，以英语为例吧，那么我们都是找的母语是英语的国家的汉学家、翻译家，他们组成一个团队，由他们来选中国和优秀的作家作品，和人民文学编辑部共同商定这样的一个翻译篇目之后来翻译的。
Take the English version, for example. The name of the English version of People Literature is called The Pastlight. And we invited a group of eminent foreign translators and sinologists who knows both Chinese and English to select the outstanding Chinese literature works, including poems, essays, and short stories, so that they can finalize the list of these works together with the people of the editorial office of People's Literature and translate them into English.
这样呢，我们不是急于求成，我们还是要保证文学的品质。这些汉学家呢，都是翻译到他们本国母语，而且呢，他们也有很强的这种文学修养，所以呢，没有用机器翻译。
We do not want to do this in a rush. We just want to carefully deal with it step by step to guarantee the quality of the literature translation. These sinologists are well educated and trained as experienced translators, and they have very good foundation as sinologists. They have enough knowledge about literature. So they are able to translate these literature works wonderfully into their mother tongues.
Thank you.
It means it's done manually.
Yeah.
Do you have any plan to go for machine translation?
今后随着人工智能发展，有计划引入这个人工智能翻译吗？
我目前没有这样的一个想法，但是呢，现在一些大的语种，我们也有一些手机上的软件可以实现这种对话和交流。我们也期待着文学能有一天，也能够通过这样的方式，能够更快的互相阅读彼此之间的作品。但是我想呢，可能是一个很长远的事情，有科学家在为此努力。
Okay. So far, we haven't had a plan of such as AI translation or something like that. But the interesting fact is that we have already got this kind of software or apps on our cell phone of interpretation simultaneously between like Chinese to English or Spanish or Japanese, something like that, so that we can talk directly. And I hope that in the future we will have this kind of software in translating literature so that we can read each other's literature very quickly.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Li Chan. There's a small request from the floor by Jivendra Giri to make a small correction in your paper. It seems that there is where the Nepal College, where you mentioned Nepal College, the question, the request is to make it into Nepal Academy. Where you mentioned Nepal College, it should be corrected as Nepal Academy. It's a small
on which part?
Yeah, it's not given here. You have to check that. It's in the paper. It's a small,
of the translation company. That's the responsibility of translation company.
It's okay, just to make that. There's one more question to our colleague Li Chan by Sulojana. Yes, please.
This is college. This is on page 31.
I want to ask to Mr. Lee. 我要问姐姐，可以吗？在中国，汉语以外 languages， 汉语以外其他的 languages 有没有literature？如果你是说汉语的人，对吗？对。所以你写Chinese汉语，但是其他的人写不写 other languages？
我们基本上中国作家都是用汉语创作，用外语创作的呢，好像很少。但是呢，我们有我们的少数民族语言，也有，因为我们是一个多民族的国家，有56个民族，55个少数民族，所以他们呢，也有每个民族都有他们的母语，也都有他们的民族的作家，其中有一部分他们也是用自己的母语来创作的。我们也建立了这个中国少数民族翻译工程。
好，谢谢。
Okay, so actually, as you know, majority of Chinese writers are writing in Chinese Mandarin. So maybe even none of them will write in English or other foreign languages. But as a multi-ethnic groups country, we have 56 ethnic groups, and 55 of them are ethnic minorities. Each ethnic group has its own writer and its own literature. And we China Writers Association has also established literature awards for ethnic minorities, as well as a project of translation of ethnic minority literature, because some of the writers are writing in their mother tongues. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. We can go, there is another question to Professor Subedi. We can go back. Yeah, I think I wanted to finish with Professor Subedi, but we are not giving that chance. So there is one. Yeah, this is what I was thinking of. Yeah. Amraj Joshi. Yeah, please.
Thank you. It's not a request, and it's just an observation from a disciple to the mentor, actually. Professor Subedi was talking about Ramayana, Bhanubhakti Ramayana, and referring it as to be the translation or transcreation. Tagging these terminologies to work of such epic proportions and of such grandeur will, I believe, slightly lower the significance. I was slightly, shaken whether these works are real translations or they should be given some other terms. I was thinking that what the Acharya is doing is extracting mythological resources from the vast reservoirs for creating something of equal grandeur. And that's why I still believe that these are different creations rather than translations. And that's what I really do have the firm belief, and therefore I really wanted to put it forth why Professor Subedi was, though it was a passing sort of remark, I guess, was using that terminology. He also even referred to Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. Lakshmi Prasad Devkota's Nepali Sakuntala, which is also extracting mythological resources from the reservoirs of knowledge and creating something new. Such thing happens all over, but that can that be tagged as to be the translation? That is the only observation that I have to make, and perhaps my Guru will have some views of it.
It's a very important intervention. There's a very important debate going on about these methods and terminologies, transcreation or translation and so on. There is this, I found one thing very, very interesting when I was comparing in Ramchandra Paudel's book, Nikai Ghanta Vasema. Sir, through hours comparing Bhanuvakta's Ramayana Sloka with Adhyatma Ramayana Sloka, and he has treated them, each of these, some of them he has left out, but he has treated all the verses individually, and he has very really translated them. I will shy about calling them transcreation because I still call them translation. If we don't, Govinda Sari is here, so if I want to know something, I will ask him. Translation has a strength. Translation has a kind of different strength. Nowadays, the discussion going on about which is the right translation. Going back to the originary is one latest theory. People say that go back to the originary of the translation when you are translating. And I honestly, translation is a terminology I never like. And translation is translation, but it's such a free translation, it's such a very powerful invention that it is a genre, it exists. I have learned this from his book. He has written a book. He brought a very important change in Nepali concept of history of translation after doing a PhD on the subject and publishing a book and producing PhDs. So that it's just he's sitting in front of me, so I feel comfortable to talk about this matter.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I just this conclusion because we need to go to Mrs. Rafia here. But before that, I just want to make a contribution to your dialogue and this translation, transgression, transliteration, and all that. Because there is another way to look at that. I mean, taking all the literary ideas, but all this, there is a philosophical approach or tool to do because texts we know that in the postmodern idea it's very true. There are no isolated texts. Texts like human beings are interconnected with all other. So any text has this intertextual references. Sometimes we don't know about that. Some are unconscious and untapped, uncharted intertextual references. We may, if we explore, we may find that. So even whatever I would say important text in the region has so many intertextual known and unknown, tapped and untapped, uncharted references that we really go into that, we can explore that. I'm talking about the intertextual references of any text. Yes. Like human beings, we are living in an interconnected universe and we don't know our connections. Text also is not insulated, isolated, and they have sometimes early connections that may be now not known. So you have to go through and explore. Maybe a lot of intertextual references you can find about one text, given any text. Okay, now there is another question for Mrs. Ravia Jati. Tri Ratna Manodar, I think. Yeah, Tri Ratna Manodar. Is that? Am I correctly pronounced? Yes. Right?
Thank you very much.
Okay, right. Yes, I know.
To Rafia Abdul Khalid, the delegate from Maldives. Actually, it is not a question, it is just a query. Now you have in your presentation mentioned the folk narratives of Maldives, and you also try to make a comparative study with the other countries, especially mentioning one Maldivian folk narrative, which is very similar to great Hindu epic Ramayana. Okay? And when we read in history books, we have read that Maldives was a Buddhist state before the introduction of Islam in that country sometime in 10th or 12th century. I am not exactly sure about the century, but it was a Buddhist state, and Buddhism was the state religion of that country before the introduction of Islam. So, as an ancient Buddhist state, do you have some folk narratives in Maldives which are based on the Buddhist literature? That's only my query. Because you did not mention anything about the folk narratives of Maldives based on the Buddhist literature. So since it was a Buddhist state for many centuries, are there any folk narratives based on the Buddhist literature? That's my query.
Yeah. Yes.
1953. Before that, Maldives is a Buddhist country.
Mike is not working. Is it the father?
No, I think it's okay. Is it okay? It's
Okay.
That's why it is okay. Now it's okay. Maldives embraced Islam in 1153 AD. Before that, it was a Buddhist country, so we have a lot of relics of Buddhism in our museum. Also, we have some relics from past. I don't know more about that, how many stories are there, but there will be folk narratives like this. One of the PhD holder, Xavier Romario, he is from Denmark. He did a PhD research in folk tales in Maldives. In his book also he has mentioned as this story about Ramayana and this Donghela. There will be more, I'm sure of it. There will be more.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Dadari. Actually, I would like to make also comment on this thing. And as you say, the histories of Sri Lankan people and Moldovan people also has a very close connection. One of our academics, linguist, Professor David Isanayak, you may know him because with by the invitation of Maldives government, he has visited the Maldives several times and did extensive research into the Maldivian languages and the literature. And he also found that there is a lot of connection of Sinhala language and Maldivian language and Sanskrit and all kind of thing. And also, as I also went through your paper, I see that a lot of folk tales. They are shared. There's a shared space of this region, and especially Sri Lanka and Maldives. And I think there's a connected story, history of cultural history of these two islands, small and bigger, little bit. Yeah. Okay. Now, actually, we can take a few more questions. If, please. Just,
It's not a question. Very small clarification actually. Addition to the discussion one. Very short, very brief. Actually, our Maldivian friend brought an example of Ramayana tales popular in her place, in the Maldives. Of late, I have been doing a study of the Ramayanas and A.K. Ramanujan. The Indian scholar has written that they have written one essay, 300 Ramayanas in the world. So I started doing the study of the Ramayana, and I found at least, by title, at least 300 varieties or more than 250 varieties of Ramayana. I made a note of them one and all. And from here to the Persian Ramayana, Russian Ramayana, Chinese Ramayana, Thai Ramayana, Japanese Ramayana, beyond our imagination. And each story is different from the other. Even the Muslim Ramayana is a different thing. And Sri Lankan Ramayana, from the angle of the Ravana, is different. So every Eastern culture has Ramayana deeply rooted message for us. But the stories are not same. So the base is same, the Ramayana, the heart is same, the Ramayana. So whether we call this transcreation or translation, the heart is translation itself. But in infinite varieties, Recently also, one Indian scholar has created a Ramayana, not Ramayana, the Sita she has written. And these have been reviewed from Nepali scholars also. So they are coming infinitely, 300 so far, the Persian Ramayana. As far as the west up to Greece, there are the versions and varieties of Ramayana. The stories are as different, as difficult to understand because the characters are different, places are different, and even everything is different. So this may be called at the heart is the translation or the words we can use. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Can I add one more? Permission, I can add one.
Okay, you'll have one. 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, not even 2 minutes. In fact, Father Kamil Pulke has done PhD in Ramakatha. His PhD dissertation is published. He was the head of the department of Hindi in Ranchi University. His PhD thesis has been published in Hindi. The title is called Ramakatha and it is also available in the Kathmandu Valley. So besides, everyone I suggest should read this Ramakatha because Hanumana also knew less than Bulke knew about Ramayana because Bulke knows even about Hanuman and Hanuman doesn't know about himself. That's the thing.
Right. Thank you.
I also want to make one very small addition in Rama. Now we all are talking about the Hindu literature. But in Buddhist literature also.
Now there is one, yeah.
Yes, there are two.
Yeah.
Lanka Sutra
Yes.
and Dr. Jataka.
And there is Jataka.
Yes. And in both of these Buddhist literature, there is the story of Rama in different way. And in that Lanka Sutra of Dr. Jataka, Sita is mentioned as the sister of Rama, not the wife of Rama. And in Lanka Sutra, Ravana is illustrated by Buddha. So I don't know how these ethics have so many phases, nearly 300 phases as you said, but in Buddhist literature also, there was a kind of impact of Rama in his literature.
Yeah, it seems there is one matrix of plot, but actually many versions of interpretations. And even within Sri Lanka, there are not one stream of story. There are few. And the Kambaraman, the southern Indian Tamil one, and it has also influenced some of part of our stories. But there is early story as well, Buddhist story as you say, the Ramayana. So I don't know, it's a huge universe of Ramayana. And then I think there is Oxford University Press book, right, on many Ramayanas. I think there's one book. I don't remember, written by a team of scholars. Anyway, there's one small thing that I want to, before we conclude, on my own, to make a comment on Lee Chang's presentation. In Sri Lanka, this connection between the Sri Lankan connections and translations and texts, there is a huge vacuum or missing part from Sri Lankan side. The reason is this, that in our history there were two important Buddhist centers from 5th century AD. There was the traditional Mahavihara, which was very close to the monarchy, feudal system, and there was much more stronger center which was called Abhayagiri Center. It was a regional, international center, and that was the center to which Pahian actually went to study the Theravada Buddhism. The so-called Theravada Buddhism was actually, it was based in the Mahavihara tradition, but this Abhayagiri center was the international kind of center. So it was inclusive kind of almost like a university like Nalanda, right? So many foreign students from China, in Korea, and many other people visited or actually studied in this Abhayagiri. So Farnian was there in the 5th or 6th century, around that part, and most of the texts produced in the Abhayagiriya center has been actually vanished, demolished, because in the 11th or 12th century that center was almost destroyed by many reasons. But most of the text written in there, in the Abhayagiriya center, is actually perhaps survived in China. So I think there is a huge area for both the countries to study the early Buddhist texts and Mahayanic texts, not only Mahayana, right? Perhaps some part of has been, I guess that has been preserved in China, because there was a huge important connection between these two countries at that time, beyond the trade, because first of all, the Buddhist idea and all the intellectual traditions, there was some connection. So now I think there are some scholars, Sri Lankan scholars, try to tap some Chinese chronicles, things to understand our own history now, because we know our history through, since I was telling that there were two centers, Buddhist centers, Mahavihara and Abhayagiriya, they were rivals, almost enemies, right? So all the history was written, of the history that has been survived was written by one center. So all the what we know about the other center, we know through the enemy's mouth. So it's very suspicious history. So to understand our own history, perhaps we have to go to China and explore some of that. So there's a lot of connection and interesting area when you go into the ancient texts and things, Buddhist texts, and because the people at that time, the Chinese and region were, at that level, they were communicating through Sanskrit. Sanskrit, not Pali, Sanskrit, Sanskrit is big universe, Buddhist universe. Pali was the later, it's Mahavihara, it's political kind of, right? So there was right between the two languages as well. Anyway, thank you so much. It was really inspirational, your presentation, and your line of thought that this literary translation is important. Actually, cutting across all these political whatever problems, the whole humanistic ideas could be still shared to promote our common humanity, the richness of our the region, and translation, as you were telling, and as you were that is important part for all the region. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee Chan, and thank you our Maldivian participant. Your folktale stories are so interesting, and there's a lot of issue again to look at these intertextual references and how the stories connected. Because, and your presentation, Professor, I think there's a huge interest, important things. The fictions, when they are shared, is a material power, right? The shared stories, shared fiction, it's not just fiction, it's a new reality. And we make the reality through these shared stories. And Homo sapiens has got this ability to create stories, right? Not the other human forms. Maybe they had language, but to create fictions was our ability. And fictions was shared by large amounts of people, and that fictions became the reality. It's not just fiction, because it drives us to create things. So this whole area of fictions and stories and importance of translations and making them shared around not in the region, around the world, makes common humanity. So I think our session was very rich in many terms. In academic terms, as well as this our focus, humanity, human dignity, the peace and reconciliation, and all that is, in that sense, I think this session also has make an important idea or thing. So I thank all the three important and our presenters, professors, and lady from Maldives, and And also I thank you the flow, and it was very rich conversation and dialogue. Your queries were interesting, and also you were coming with your own ideas, which were also enriched our discussion. Thank you very much. We have concluded a little early, so we have a little more time. Thank you, and enjoy your evening. Thank you very much.
Don't make it so productive to initiate production.
Thank you very much. Mike is correct, but yes, a vehicle will be available location some 1 hour and 15 minutes drive to Chandragiri resorts, where we'll have the final day, a session and the valedictory ceremony day before we draw Kathmandu Declaration there.